Today I'm going to talk about what is the Course in Miracles. And the focus of this talk is to sort of give a general introduction to what it is and why it's significant. Now, Joseph Campbell was a comparative mythologist, so he studied philosophies and religions and stories from all over the world, and he compared them, and he looked for common threads that they could offer us as human beings looking for meaning and relief from suffering and understanding of our place in the universe and what the universe was. And he said that myths have a cosmological function. They are needed to explain what the universe is, what our place is in it, what the ecology of it is, what are the relationships that go on in the universe. And then it was to give us a sense of duty and connection in those web of relationships that gave us a feeling of dignity and empowerment. And then another task was to, before the terror of life, before the vastness of life, to pull out from that stage, the view from the stage of your experience, a sense of awe for this tremendous creative story that we're a part of. And as well as having this relationship clarity about one's relationship with self and others, the function of myth was to give you a sort of list of parameters, a conscience, a guideline for your conscience, what is right and what is wrong. And perhaps ultimately it was to help you confront death and the trials of life, the stages of life. So every philosophy, every mythology, every culture has to confront these fundamental questions. Who am I? What is the significance of death? What dies? How can I act correctly? What's the right livelihood for me? How do I make sense of the challenges that I face in the world? And over time we've come up with many answers as a species to those questions. And in the 1970s, late 1960s in New York, there was a woman called Dr. Helen Schucman, who was a psychotherapist at a hospital affiliated with Columbia University, and her boss in her department that she worked closely with was a man called Dr. Bill Thetford. And so they were involved in clinical psychology, psychotherapy, handling mental illness, helping people deal with the challenges of life, which is what the myths do, right? And Helen Schucman was an atheist, a militant atheist in her own words. And I think it's important to point out that sanity and sane have the same root, and it's the same root as the word saint, right? So saint means whole, not divided. So sane is this sense of like the halos on the saints. And a fragmented mind can't grasp this wholeness. And the fragmented mind is essentially the ego. But anyway, this relationship between these two doctors of psychology came to a head in the sense that Bill Thetford said, oh God, there must be another way. Because there they were sort of playing God. You know, they were saying, well, he's mentally ill and she isn't, and this is what is going on in this form of psychosis, and this is the treatment. And so, you know, just as you pray to God or you go to a doctor, these doctors were playing the role of an authority figure that helped you with a prescription of some remedy, whether it was talk therapy or drugs, to handle your illness, your psychological illness. And people had faith. We have faith in the medical profession, the scientific process, and so that's how psychological medicine works. That's the idea behind the hospitals, psychological clinics. And what's interesting about Bill's statement was, like, you know, we're here, our job is to help people get better. And that means we have to be the better people ourselves, because you can't be an expert race driver without practice. And you can't give advice to a young race driver until you've mastered the sport. And so what Bill and Helen sort of unconsciously recognized was that they were squabbling. There was all this pettiness in their attitudes and in their professional relationship and in the department as a whole. So they were like, well, if we're here to promote sanity and yet we are not walking our talk, that's something we need to look at. And I spent a decade in India. I've lived in 32 countries. I've lived on 5 continents. I've been married and divorced twice. I've had a stepson. I've had a very adventurous and at times difficult family. I have foster brothers, one of whom has a great attraction to violence and a lot of sorrow in that attraction. I have a black sister. I have a very varied experience of humanity. I've worked in a lot of different capacities. I've lived in the third world. I've lived in the first world. I've spent long periods in Buddhist monasteries. I spent periods in Christian monasteries. I've studied Spinoza, Einstein's favorite philosopher. I've studied science. I've gone to Oxford for interview with the foremost, like the Thomas Huxley of the day, the Richard Dawkins, who's the popularizer of neo-Darwinian thought today, the chief popularizer. I've been on scientific expeditions in the Pacific Ocean and in Iceland. I've acted in plays. I've learned different languages. I've studied Sanskrit. I've studied Tamil. I've met poet laureates. I've lived in a van in San Francisco as I handled the fallout of my divorce. I've worked on farms all over the planet. I've lived in Beverly Hills. I've got a really broad experience of life. And it's just a story. But in my understanding of philosophy and religion, and I've studied yoga with one of the leading yoga teachers on the planet for 10 years in India. And in my understanding of religion and philosophy, I've read Hegel, I've read Wittgenstein, I've read all these great philosophers. I can handle that. But they're all kind of secondary in my understanding to the genius of what these two people in New York in the 70s brought forward into form, a document called The Course in Miracles. And I've only found one other thing, although the Hawaiian approach called Ho'oponopono has some parallels, but only one other thing that comes close. And in fact is very useful to dance with The Course in Miracles. And that's the teaching of Advaita Vedanta from Ramana Maharshi, who lived in a small town, in a religious town, in pilgrimage town in South India, with what's said to be the oldest hill on earth. I don't know how they prove that, but that's what the Indians say. There's a hill called Arunachala. And they're saying very similar things, these two approaches, the teachings of Ramana Maharshi and the teachings of the Course in Miracles. And Bill Thetford on that day, and sort of a moment of both clarity and frustration, he said, there must be another way, right? We're here and we're arguing, and apparently that other way is the Course in Miracles. And it's without doubt, in my opinion, and I'm not interested in evangelism. I'm not interested in trying to persuade others of why this is true, because it's a relative truth. Because something might speak to you, like everything teaches the beauty of a plant, the pain of the death of someone you love. Everything is teaching you all the time. But in terms of philosophy, in terms of something that will really, if put into practice in the right way, bring you the most incredible peace. You can be a prisoner on death row, and if you get the Course in Miracles, I mean, if you really get the message that it's pointing to. And I think this is the symbolism of, when Jesus is on the cross, there's this character next to him who I think he's a murderer, and he's done these terrible things, and he says, look, this is the message that I'm trying to convey. And his eyes open, and he gets it. And so it's not about what your position is in life, it's not about your history. And I shared my history simply because it informs the breadth of my experience and my exploration. Not to make that important, but to give you a sense of like how the journeys I've had and the experiences I've had with the human condition, my own human condition, and those of others that I see around me, has brought me to this conclusion that the Course in Miracles is, with Ramana Maharshi, the most advanced teachings. I personally feel that the teachings of the Course in Miracles are a very good way to bring you to the much more challenging, in a way, teachings of Ramana. Because Ramana's teaching is just asking the question, who am I? Whereas the Course in Miracles, it starts off, it says, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. And everything that you see with your naked eye has a lifespan. Everything you see with every prism or lens of the electromagnetic spectrum has a lifespan. So everything you see that can be seen in the known and unknown physical universe, because we don't quite understand dark matter yet fully, but it's still something that has a generative beginning and is expanding out with the rest of the universe that we know and understand thanks to Einstein's theory. All of that has a finite life. So all of it can be threatened. And it says nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. So it's basically saying that nothing that we consider to be concrete exists. And how does this relate to psychotherapy? How does this relate to your relationships with your mother and your father, with your children, with your career, with the people that you find most difficult in your life, with your bank account? It seems a long way away from that. And yet I've said that if you're a prisoner on death row and you've got nothing, apparently that can fend off your depression and sense of self-pity, how can this possibly, this statement and the psychotherapy that's involved in the Course in Miracles, how can that possibly liberate you of pain? Now, there's some commonalities between the Course in Miracles and Buddhism, because in the Course in Miracles it says directly quotes, these two people wrote the Course. And they wrote it in such a way that Bill was writing it down on a typewriter from the notes that Helen had written in shorthand over a period of, I think, 7 to 8, 10 years, something like that. And then they were editing it, and they were having conversations with the voice that appeared in Helen's head. And it wasn't a spoken voice, it was a dictated voice. And I've had experience of that dictated voice in my life. And it usually comes for me when I wake one morning, and it's very rare. I mean, it might happen once a year, or it just depends. And it's not something it's just a form, so it's not something important, because there are other ways that we get insight and meaning. Well, to answer the question of how this helps us with our psychotherapy, how it helps with our lives, implied in this book is a sense that everything that happens has only two possible stories, right? One is a cry for help, which you might band all physical illness, all psychological illness, all of the things that we might call evil or abuse, as well as waste of time and energy and resources, and neurosis and attack thoughts. Basically, attack thoughts is the meta reference, attack on self and others. And then sort of an extension of love, which handles the cry for love. And they're the only two movements in the universe. And the philosophy of the Course in Miracles says this world isn't real. It's the creation, the projection of an ego thought system. It wasn't created by God. It is not part of divinity. Although the splendor of the plants and the animals and the miracle of a lion, or the fascinating history of the evolution of ants, or the arc of a pigeon in flight, or the unfathomed mystery of tachyons, things that we don't know if they're wave particles or waves or particles. They're just unknown, but they travel faster than the speed of the light that we see emitted from suns. Like all of these things that make up this known universe are a dream, part of a dream, a very concrete, believable dream. And it's a bit like one of those optical illusions where, you know, you look at a picture and to begin with you see an old lady, and then you look again and it's a beautiful young woman in a different, your eye shifts in this, or it could be, you know, a butterfly, but actually it's a monster. And so one of the things that the mind is doing is that it's condemning. The ego mind is condemning because it wants to scapegoat. And this, the very foundation of the metaphysics of the Course, is the idea that the ego believed it could kill God, and it believed that that was possible, and it was that tiny mad thought that created the realm of separation and bodies and minds that were fundamentally distorted and asleep in a dream world, much like Neo in the Matrix movie, who's asleep, you know, dreaming this world. And so in the Bible it says Adam fell asleep. That's like one of the first parts of the Bible, but it never says he woke up, right? And so that's there's a lot of deep mystical meaning in the word Adam in the Hebrew language. But it basically, it means that, you know, we fell asleep to our real nature and we became bodies, and the body is wholly neutral. And much like a puppet, the body can be, the strings of the puppet can be pulled by the thought system of the ego, which is full of fear, or it can be controlled by the thought system of love and spirit. And the goal of life becomes to wake up from the dream. And also the illusion that is at the center of the Course in Miracles teaching is that there is just oneness. There's oneness, right? So not one being, but oneness. And that oneness split into a million, trillion, billion, endless, almost endless, fragmented parts. And the idea was that you could bury this lie, this sort of fragmented, holographic, endlessly replicating lie that grows into more and more complication and more sophistication. And I could bury myself, my ego self, separated off in these billions, trillions of separated identities, whether it's a piece of sand or a human being or a mountain, or however you want to measure these separated entities from your relative point of view as a different level of consciousness. And buried in that was a truth that once you woke up to it, you could see that there was a cry for help, there was an extension of love, and then there was also attack thoughts which generated defense thoughts. And what goes outside of this straitjacketed story is the psychotherapy that heals the mind of this illusion. And that's what the Course in Miracles is about. And it says, it starts off and it says, nothing I see in this room on this street means anything. And then it goes on to say, my meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world, and what I am seeing is a form of vengeance, right? And you might say, I hate this politician, and voice all your prejudice. And it's like, rather than seeing what's actually going on, you're stuck in a world of effects, not in the cause of the problem. So you're projecting your self-loathing for killing God and the guilt that goes with it, or killing life, or killing love, the belief that you could do that which you can't, onto something outside, and your lack of love is ruling the definition that you ascribe to your perception. So what you see is a reflection of your belief system. And so, although the Course in Miracles is in a Christian language, what it's ironically saying is that all belief systems will bind you. And the only belief system that will liberate you is the one that's related to the facts of what's actually going on. And that's where the metaphysics comes in. And the proof of this is your peace, right? So if you say, this makes sense, that I'm trapped in an illusion, and by attacking the illusion, I get more ensnared and entrapped in it, then the wisdom of the psychotherapy that works is where I see that I have a way of seeing that's holographic. So when I see my rage and my judgment and my attack thoughts and I project them out, I have a moment in the, that's why the great mystic Krishnamurti said, observing is the highest intelligence. So when I see this projection going out, judging others, attacking others, condemning others, and self, I have the opportunity to say, whoa, wait. That projection is rooted in fear. And I was created by love. And my job here is not to get more bound up in fear. My job here is to liberate myself of attack thoughts. And I think it's quite obvious that, in the world, whether you're a monk or a doctor or a homeless person, life is quite hard. You have to deal with aging, you have to deal with people having very different viewpoints to you, you have to deal with people stealing things from you, you have to deal with your own lack of immorality that might come up at times, and the guilt that goes with that. And you might have to deal with a psychopathic nature where you don't have any of that, and you've just lost your conscience. It's just not there. But whoever you are in the story of your life, the thing about the Course in Miracles is that, the foundation that set up the Course when it was written, or the foundation that was set up after the Course was written, is called the Foundation for Inner Peace. And basically its focus is not on giving you a guru or a teacher, but on introducing you to your own inner teacher. And the idea is that when we try and fix the illusion, and I'm not saying this is wrong, what the Course refers to as magical thinking is fixing the illusion. So taking medicine to heal my health problems is perfectly fine if it's the right medicine for you and you feel safe and comfortable and at peace with that. And the body, you love it as best you can. But that's at the level of magic, right? So it's the level of effect. And the only true healing happens at the level of mind, because your body's health requires forgiveness, right? If it's in an ill state, take the best medicines you can, eat the best diet you can. But at a deeper level, your job is to go to the level of cause and say, I'm still my true self beyond the dream. And all the drama that I'm attached to, all the condemnation and offense I take and attacks I justify, are keeping me embroiled in this illusion. It's rather like a screen, and on the screen is a set of moving images of a movie theater, right? But all of that story, and you're the hero of that dream, you're watching it and saying who's good and who's bad and whether you've done a good performance or not. But behind all of that, this effect, the world of effects, is the world of cause, which is the screen. And the screen doesn't change, and it's not limited, and it's just light, and it's just love, and it doesn't have any opposites in it, and it doesn't have a beginning and an end. And what the Course says is that the journey between the hero of the character on the screen back to the realization of his unified self is the journey to the embodiment of the still quiet voice that is the screen, represented by the screen metaphorically. And what the Course says is you have to listen to the Holy Spirit that usurps and works within, but not as a part of the ego thought system, because the ego thought system is the dream, and it helps liberate you from that. And Ramana Maharshi, the mystic from South India, he used the word viveka, which is a similar meaning to the Holy Spirit in the Course in Miracles. It means discrimination. And Krishnamurti used the word intelligence. To read between the lines of thought is the root meaning of intelligence. So when you're faced with suffering, it's very, if someone comes in and tells you the truth, you're not the body, you were not born, you will not die. The solution to your pain is to recognize that this dream ended a long time ago and you're looking at the past. It's an optical illusion. Wake up from that, refine your perception, see the light in all, and drop the special love of the world, right? And the special love is the special relationships. He's better than she is. And that's a very difficult thing to do, because even when you choose a life partner, that's based on preferences. And you look at some of the great saints of India, and their parents are trying to marry them off, and they've already reached a very evolved state, and they can't, they struggle with things like marriage, because it means, choosing one illusion over the other, and they're just like, well, I'm only interested in going home. I've had enough of this place of, a friend used to say, it's like a poo-coated turd, right? So you eat, you bite into the pleasure, and with it comes all this pain, right? You fall in love with these beautiful young bodies when you're youthful, and then you have to handle the conflicts that come with the split mind, right? And the split mind says, I'm in the dream, and then a part of the mind knows that the dream is an illusion. So this teaching of the Course in Miracles, it's 365 days. First, there's a big text, and the text is so important to study. You can do the lessons, and I don't think they have the same efficacy. They definitely have power. There's 365 lessons in the workbook, but they don't have the same power as reading the text, because the text is a sort of philosophical underpinning, and if you're going to use a computer and no one's ever shown you how to use a computer, and you're an alien to this planet, first you're going to have to learn the language of the manual, and then you're going to have to learn to read the manual, and then you're going to have to practice what the manual says, and then you're going to have to, get some sense of what the programming is that the software in the computer helps you with. So in a similar way, the text helps you explain what's the hardware of the computer, what is the mind, and then the workbook lessons is sort of the software programming that says, now your job is to deprogram the programming of the ego thought system. And so that means you have to start to look at things differently without the eyes of condemnation. Say, well, this is a call for love. This is an extension of love. And to recognize that you are the experiment. Your fear is being looked at. And when you see the fear in others, you can either judge that and put them down and then get more embroiled in fear yourself, or you can become part of a story that helps wake up from the dream. And then your presence becomes automatically a support to others who are handling suffering at different levels. They may have no idea where the suffering comes from, and they may have some spiritual or psychotherapeutic wisdom where they start to see, and every mother and father does, or every mature adult has some sense of, if he's hungry, give him food. If he's tired, let him sleep. We're aware of the body's needs, but the deeper needs of transcending this illusion so that you can be happy and peaceful and have faith in life and feel like there's a purpose and a meaning to life and not be depressed and suicidal. That is the primary focus of the Course in Miracles and of Ramana. And I said, and I'm going to finish this video soon, but I said that I would cover why Ramana's teaching, Who Am I, is really profound, but maybe easier to fathom when you've studied the Course in Miracles for a while. He says, who am I? Right? And when he was 16 or 17, he lay down, he had this spontaneous experience. He said, I'm going to die. And there was no fear operating in him. He just lay down. I think he was in the attic of his small parents' house in a village in South India. And he lay down and he said, well, what dies? Does the body die? Okay, the body dies. And does the mental body die? Mental mind die? Yes, that dies. But is there something that doesn't die? And he felt like, oh, I'll get ready now for rigor mortis. And he sat with this feeling of that he was ready to kick the bucket, and this was the end of his journey. And then a big shift happened, and the shift was he became spontaneously enlightened. He realized that, and I'm just telling the story as a story which has no relationship to your long journey. All of us have this long journey to get to that point that he got to that morning, where he just, he didn't need yoga, he didn't need the Course in Miracles, he didn't need psychotherapists. He was just at the end of the journey, and the end of the journey is like you recognize what you are. and the Course in Miracles says, I am spirit, right? You can read that in the Course, but to get to that state of actual, like, the death of the ego, complete death of the ego, because he probably, in the Hindu philosophy, he's probably spent lifetimes preparing for that. And I think compassion and intelligence say, whether people are open to it or not, there's an awareness that comes that this is really all we're looking for. We're looking for the happiness of our being that has never left us, and you go to a big city, you go to a small town, you go to the third world, you go to the first world, you go to an army battleground, you go to a yoga studio, you will find attack thoughts, you will find defense thoughts, you will find insecurity. And here was a man who lay down, and all of that died, and what was left was just the happiness of being. And he remained practical in the world, but there was no way you could tell him that he was the hero in the dream on the screen. He was just the screen. He was this unchanging rock. And that's what evolution points to. And my teacher used to say, I had a teacher, an Indian teacher in Los Angeles for many years, and he said, none of this that I've just talked about to you on this video makes any sense until you've reached a point where the ears are open to hear. You've had, like in the Course in Miracles says, the mind can take a lot of pain, right? But there's a limit to that pain. And there's a point where you say, okay, I've had enough of the pain. I've had enough of the suffering that the self-concept that I'm trapped in brings me. And it starts to fall away. But it only falls away when you like, because all education is about plowing you with information and skills. And it's the irony of the deepest forms of psychotherapy and spiritual wisdom are about undoing the self-concept. I'm this, I'm that, I was born, I will die. And in the midst of that journey, you have to focus on, how am I going to handle my pension? How am I going to handle my children's college degree? How am I going to handle this sickness? So there's like this whole pragmatism that has to go with the illusion. And what you're constantly looking in the mirror of is this, like an iceberg being pulled up from the ocean, this unconscious mind that has all these buried fears. And as you bring the observer that is aligned with this deep metaphysical wisdom to this unconscious pain, and you become more aware, you stop projecting it out onto others. And that's why the Course in Miracles is such a powerful teaching, because it doesn't require a psychotherapist, it doesn't require a spiritual teacher. It's about you sitting in the stillness. It doesn't require becoming a monk for the rest of your life. It doesn't require joining a religion. It doesn't even require believing in Jesus. And it doesn't require believing in God. But the voice that came to Helen and Bill, they felt it was Jesus, right? And so whether you believe in Jesus or not, whether you're a Christian or not, my sense from my studies is that if you study the life of Ramana Maharshi, and we can study Buddha's life too, but like I think several hundred years after Buddha died, they started writing down what he said, so everything was passed by voice. But we have video footage of Ramana, we have his dialects edited and corrected by himself, and we just have this impeccable life, So on the one hand, the Course in Miracles has this framework which says the world is a dream, your job is to wake up. And then the same thing from this living person who seemed to have mastered the fearful mind that created death, suffering, limitation, and the illusion of separation, mastered it in the sense that it just dropped away. And the thing is about the Yoga Sutras and yoga in general, because I studied it for a long time, people think yoga is about stretching and so forth, and it is. It's got 8 levels to it. But the last path, like the 7th path is called dhyana, and the 8th path is called meditation or samadhi. And there's variants of this terminology in the Christian tradition and in the Buddhist tradition. But 7 is dhyana, which is meditation, which is sort of like this, the deep root of meditation means measuring. And so you're measuring you've got these two different like to what extent are you grateful, forgiving of the illusion and waking up, and to what extent are you embroiled in the illusion and attacking and defending and being depressed and thinking you're going to die one day, which you practically will in the body, but then there's some other entity that you're trying to make contact with which transcends that thought system. So there's this juxtaposition of measurement. And then when you've mastered that measuring, that meditation, you come to samadhi. And in yoga, you sort of tend to you have these glimpses of the real world, but you tend to get trapped back in your practice and in, like I'm the body and I have to practice asanas and stuff. And so I've always felt, having studied yoga for 10 years, that Ramana was deeper, because he said, when there's two forms of samadhi, which is the temporary death of the ego mind at a full level, and then there's the complete death. And the complete death happened to him when he was 18, right? And he says, I am spirit. In the Course in Miracles, it says, I am spirit. So you can read that on a page, but it may take a very long time to fully actualize that in terms of the falling away of the illusions in your mind. And so like there's nirvikalpa samadhi, which is the sense of like the death of the mind temporarily. And then there's sahaja samadhi, which is the complete death of the mind. There's another term which I can't remember for a moment, but it means that there's no separate self-concept left. And people like Krishnamurti and Ramana were in that state. And the thing is, they had different personalities. Your personality doesn't go, but you may have moments where you're just completely out of this world and you just don't see the attack thoughts. You just see love. And that's what we call revelation. So people don't necessarily recognize that the journey of the universe is to this state where the idea the universe exists falls away and all you see is the light in others. And I'm describing it, and I've had glimpses of that, but that's what this psychotherapy is about. And that's where this sense of like sanity and saint come together, because the wholeness that you've been sleeping ignorant of becomes the central stage, and the fear that has bound you to illusions for so long falls away.